Good morning. Welcome to another edition of the Benjamin Dixon Show. Obviously, not Benjamin Dixon. I'm Dixon. I'm Anoa Changa. Happy Friday. Last Friday, it was Friday the 13th, and it was an auspicious day because the teen boy did actually get his license if you were tuning in last Friday when I was co-hosting. So he's been riding and whipping around about town, and I had to remind him that gas is over $4 a gallon here in the Atlanta metro area. You might look up if you see 389 or so, but how many of you are actually paying for your gas in cash? Because it really annoys me when you have the little, like, more mom and pop. And I understand folks are trying to make their buck however they can. There might even be some other transactional things that cause them to have the difference in price between cash and a debit card or a credit card. But once upon a time, cash and debit used to be charged as cash, and now debit's charged as credit. So I don't know. It's just one of my little pet peeves. It's small business. It's time to support small businesses, but you're charging me a little bit extra at the pump than the QT or the racetrack down the block. So I don't know what to do about that right now. That's my little just like mom moment, because having a car and sharing with teenagers, young adults, and folks who we're supporting through school and stuff. It's like y'all need to get some jobs because gas is expensive, and I know you trying to go places, and I'm trying to go places, but it's putting a hurting on my pocket. And I know that we just saw legislation move forward out of Congress. Amazing that legislation actually moved forward out of Congress, right? Out of the Senate in particular, around baby formula. And hopefully there will actually be relief soon for parents of young babies, of infants who are relying on formula, and folks can get into the whole, well, you ought to be breastfeeding anyway. Breastfeeding is not as easy as people make it out to be. One, if you had a blessed, angels and, breastfeeding, lactation support and all, good for you. Congratulations, boo boo. Not everybody has access to all the support in the world, right? Not everybody can afford to buy all the breast pads. Not everybody gets a breast pump. You can get a breast pump sometimes through WIC, but there's a lot of judgment about whose work and time is valuable and what support people do and don't get. And we really need to think about that when we're talking about, especially when people are in tight conditions, what they ought to be doing anyway. You ought to just mind your own business. How about that? I breastfed, and actually this isn't what I even want to talk about, but I just thought about it because of the formula, the formula crisis that's been happening. I remember when my niece, she's adorable. She should actually come host someday. She's rather entertaining when she's not watching Blippi, but when she was a baby, she's almost 3. When she was a baby, the formula that she had to get, because she had, like, I think an iron deficiency or something like that, which is a little bit more expensive. And while, you might look at one canister and it's like, oh, it's not that expensive, but different formulas. So if it's already more expensive and you have to use maybe a little bit more of it than like a cheaper brand, then you're actually paying more over a longer period of time. And if you're on a fixed income, if you're a little bit squinched, my sister and her husband have been a little squinched by the economic times, like a lot of us have, that starts to add up. So as a family, we've all pitched in and bought formula from time to time. We've all pitched in and bought diapers to help out with the new little one. Also, like I said, because, being here in this pandemic moment, it has been tight. So to sit here open and fix your mouth, tell people they ought to be breastfeeding. My sister, unfortunately, was not able to breastfeed because just difficulty, trying to get the latch. I mean, not all babies latch on the same way. It can be very frustrating. So don't be out here telling young mothers, new mothers, previous mothers, like, folks might already be beating themselves up over whether they're breastfeeding or not. I mean, I breastfed with my first child. Easy peasy. She was simple. I got a breast pump from WIC because I was in school. Easy peasy. Was going to breastfeed with my second child. It was a lot more difficult for various reasons. And, sometimes you feel bad about yourself when your body don't work the way you're told it ought to. So just shut your mouth about what people ought to be doing. Hopefully, there'll be formula on the shelves for folks really soon. And kudos to Congress or the Senate anyway, for actually getting its act together on something that matters. I wish they could get their act together on some other things. Anyway, I have an amazing guest today. I am joined by someone who, I always talk to really cool people. So, but Pam is one of the people I have the best conversations with about very real stuff. Now, if you ever saw any of my older commentary, you know that I could be critical of progressives as well. I mean, liberals, Democrats, whomever, they definitely deserve to get it. Republicans, damn sure going to get it. I don't know if I can say damn on Friday morning on ACT.TV, but I just said damn. Oops. But progressives within our own spaces, there are things that we need to address and deal with and figure out, not just how we are like shifting and changing, but also like really reflecting, right? Just because we might be right on issues doesn't mean that the tactics that we're using, that the way we're going about it is necessarily the right way. And Pam is someone that I've been able to ideate and talk through about these things. So one thing that I think is really amazing that Pam has been working on is organizing around veterans and national security and peace from a progressive lens. And this is an area that I have personally avoided because national security, foreign policy is not my thing. But having these conversations with Pam and just really like why we can't no longer cede ground on these conversations and topics, it was like, wow, a breath of fresh air. So not exactly what we're going to talk about today, but I was really, grateful when she agreed to, hop on at 8 something in the morning to chop it up with us. So Pam, good morning. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I am here. I'm grateful to be with you and also trying to make sense of this world that we're living in. So yeah. Excited to be here.
I mean, Pam is like I said, Pam does a lot of work on disinfo, national security, peace, and throws down with the WFP, Working Families Party. And so when we were talking a couple nights ago about the onslaught of attacks on candidates like, soon to be, I'm still not sure. I guess I'll find out at 11:30 what the update is when I interview her, but soon to be Congresswoman Summer Lee and just, several other candidates, there were millions and millions of dollars spent against them. And they were depicted as, almost being anti-American. Like Pam, like you sent me a message, watching the return, just watching the reactions, and just you were processing through some of the way in which certain organizations were actively working against them. Now we know that people do run different ads. We attack, folks when they're running, they might attack opponents, they might run dirty, but there's something that's different about what was happening with Summer and other candidates. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you were observing and why it did not sit right with you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'll say a little bit. So for background, I enlisted in the military out of high school and found myself doing counterterrorism intelligence work. And it's constantly fascinating. The thing that has put me in this field is how we continue to define or not define matters of security in the United States. And it's constantly from a frankly white supremacist and extremely patriarchal lens. And what I think is really interesting is we're living in a moment, and it's been several years of building momentum around this. But over the last few years, Black and brown liberatory movements and forces, progressive forces, have been forcing a conversation around transparency and accuracy, frankly, of what is human rights in the United States and abroad, right? Particularly, I think, since the uprising, we, the progressive left, I think, have really been forcing that conversation around accountability of the United States, right? Here at home, how are we accountable to ensuring that we're not going to continue to see the killing of Black lives by state forces? And likewise, how are we, the United States, complicit in the killing or oppression by state forces of lives abroad, right? And what is really interesting is that more than ever, we're seeing more Black and brown, justice-oriented, progressive champions like Summer Lee that are not only unafraid to speak truth to power, but are popular in their position because they are bringing to Congress not only a beautiful truth telling to them, but a commitment to the working class and a time where we're in a working class power struggle. And so politics has been dirty since its inception. But what's really interesting now and dangerous, right? What is dangerous now is just seeing the amount of money, resources that lobby groups are funneling against candidates like Summer Lee, particularly because they pose a threat to a status quo that would force us to actually make the structural changes we need to, let's say, put conditions on one of the United States' closest partners, Israel, to stop abuse of human rights against Palestinians, right? Would a Summer Lee be a threat in Congress to police unions? Absolutely, right? And so the thing that is most alarming to me is how money in politics and, frankly, toxic actors in politics are trying to outmaneuver democracy, right, by pouring money. And frankly, the money, how is the money being used? The money is being used to slander and smear Black and brown women in particular, running on those kinds of agendas as not being a Democrat, which to me is a skip and a throw away from basically calling someone not an American, right? It's the same playbook. And it's important for us to connect the dots between, dangerous political tactics that do that to candidates that are, a Black woman who's working class running on truth, and then not seeing how that disinformation could put that person's life at risk, whether on the campaign trail or when they go into office.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think what you said right there at the end too about, this being almost akin to calling someone, or a stone's throw from calling someone un-American or not a real American. I mean, when you're talking about a district that is a heavily Democratic district, I mean, in this case, the primary is essentially their general election, right? There is no real serious Republican takeover that could possibly happen in that particular district. So you're right. So when you're going at this person is not really even a Democrat, because that there is a certain segment of the Democratic voter base that does resonate with, because that is a part of their identity and they want to make sure they're good Democrats and they're voting for the good person or whatever. It also is interesting because while it's not always a white candidate that is doing that is being backed when this is happening, we've seen this in North Carolina. There was a Black woman that was running, and I forget the other sister, but I think, we saw this happening against other POC candidates too, right? Even when the preferred candidate is of color as well. So we see this attack being labeled, but ultimately what's happening is this, this is the good one that gets in line and does what we want them to do. Whether that person, and I'm not saying that individuals themselves, I mean, Steve Irwin can kick rocks in my opinion. Just watching a clip of him from March talking about Summer's candidacy. I mean, there's a lack of care and concern with the way they even describe and talk about us when we don't fit into a certain box. But I think what you were sharing with me, though, about how this actually falls into when we're talking about disinformation and the framings, because it makes me think of something else. I think it was Brandy Collins Dexter, who's a disinfo expert and used to be with Color Change, was saying that, Shireen Mitchell also, I think, has said the same thing, that disinformation is not even so much that it has to be absolutely a false thing that's being said. It's also the framing and the way in which the information is being, curtailed or channeled or projected to the audience to give a particular narrative that isn't actually itself true, right? So the narrative untruth versus whether or not the specific facts are untrue. And so I really appreciate the way you were kind of injecting that. What should we be doing when we're seeing candidates and we're seeing this type of thing happening? Because these are candidates that are being, attacked with millions. It's a lot of money that is going specifically just to attack these candidates. And in some instances, when you're looking at the PAC associated with AIPAC, you're looking at entities that have no problem supporting anti-democracy Republicans. I think it was over 100 of them that were supported by the same PAC that was simultaneously tearing down, Summer Lee and other folks running for Congress. Yeah.
I mean, It's really concerning because the mainstreaming, first of all, the mainstreaming of disinformation and propagandizing as a political tactic has become so unhinged and so uncontained, particularly by Democrats, because the reality is, and this is like hard to say, and I get so annoyed because I'm like, this is the reality, and we can't be so fragile as to not face this head on. We are in a major and dangerous power struggle where one of the two, duopoly parties is actively ensuing an assault, using disinformation, targeting our communities, right? We know that they're specifically targeting Black and Brown voters, particularly male voters, that they can peel off, using conspiracy theories and disinformation in ways that we know foreign actors have also done to undermine our democracy as part of a coordinated, right, far-right use of political violence to push forward their agenda and take power. That is happening and has been happening. National security experts, have been saying this for several years. But what I find it fascinating is how the unresolved white supremacy culture of the Democratic establishment is countering that with more disinformation, with more counter-narrative spin, because there's a disrespect of our base. There's a fundamental continual disrespect that our voters don't know enough. So we're just going to have to trick them into not picking, certain candidates so that we can consolidate and continue to keep corporate establishment power. And it's getting messier because I see the establishment using diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of that disinformation, which is extremely harmful and has been part of their tokenistic strategy. And I think more than ever, I know that we say this on and on and on, but organizing in the way, I wish somebody out there had the resources and bandwidth to actually peel back the layers. And if all of that money had not been deployed, all of those nefarious money and tactics and influential actors deployed against Summer Lee, what would be her true win numbers? What would Summer Lee's true win numbers be? Because the fact that we're still like, oh, we're not sure if she did win, if the votes were counted, right? This is going to continue to undermine our electoral system, which is already hanging by a thread because of the attacks that we've endured. And so there is a enormous need for the left to aggressively mobilize wealth. And when I talk about the progressive left, white progressives and liberals have the most responsibility. And yet, from what I've seen with Love, not the organization or the commitment that has been required over the last 5 to 3 years, right? Or even the last year. Just seeing the mobilization around the SCOTUS leak, to me, is one clear indicator from a national security perspective. When I just think about civil society and grassroots activation against, responding to the collapse of our democratic institutions, we all need to be real that mobilization it felt like we don't have the gas because we don't have the resources, because we don't have the leadership. And so I think that there's a real serious contention where we need to mobilize wealth to fund civil society and grassroots organizing, because it is amazing the organizing feat that campaign, the Summer Lee campaign, did to organize as aggressively as it did across so many different places that, traditional pundits said that we can't win. We can't win on a message of Medicare for all. We can't win. It's a lie. It's a lie, and it's scarcity thinking, and it's small thinking in the face of crisis. And so I believe that progressives cannot risk getting in our own power struggle because of white supremacy culture in progressive spaces that oftentimes feeds into a disbelief that Black and brown women are doing exactly what needs to be done in order to organize and say the things that need to be said. I'm worried that that's definitely something that I see I'm still seeing people say, oh, well, Brittany Ramos de Barros, who, is a a friend and an anti-war movement leader, a veteran running in New York 11, a woman who has run a campaign for over a year, who has organized one of the most robust grassroots, multi-faith, intergenerational coalitions in Staten Island that has happened in years, with the help of local leaders. And people are still saying, well, I don't think she can win against Max Rose, who frankly has not shown any of the leadership credentials or frankly, even a full analysis of the crisis of the moment. And so these comparatives that I think are based in a continual kind of, hinged white supremacy and patriarchal kind of culture in politics is a liability to us being able to decisively win against some of these destructive attacks, particularly disinformation that targets our communities.
I think that's a good place to shift quickly before we wrap up in this conversation, because I could just talk to Pam, and I do talk to Pam sometimes for long stretches of time. But something else happened, I think, yesterday, and it got put on the radar by you. George W. Bush telling on himself. Just telling on himself. David, guys, do we have a clip of the former president of Junior talking about his yeah.
In contrast, Russian elections are rigged. Political opponents are imprisoned or otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq, too. Anyway, 75.
Yeah, so Iraq and Ukraine, totally the same place. Pam, what are your thoughts just seeing the former president's gaffe, a slip up in this moment?
Before I was 23, I deployed twice by myself.
In contrast, elections are rigged.
In support of Iraq and Afghanistan. And when I heard this clip, it's hard to really vocalize the rage that I felt, not only for the admission, but for the laughter that came from the audience. For the laughter that came in such a horrible truth, because ultimately what he is saying, let's be very clear, it's really easy, right, to say, look at that bad man Putin doing this genocidal war. But we need to, he admitted subconsciously to doing the same thing, because then he says, anyway, Iraq too. So not only does he make the gaffe of mixing it up, but he admits essentially to yep, Iraq too, which was him. And then he moves on, people laugh. And then he says, I'm 75, rationalizing his gaffe. And to me, I just am sitting here being the impunity of war criminality at the highest level. This is a man who has been rehabilitated by countless political actors across the spectrum who, painted pictures of disabled veterans, as part of his rehabilitation, and now is laughing about it. It felt very Hunger Games to me. And the biggest thing is, the more that people reveal themselves, the more it will radicalize countless working class people that cannot continue to tolerate, frankly, the corruption of politicians at the highest levels that leads to death. So, as intense as that may sound, that's what I heard in that gaffe. It's important for us to really hold the magnitude of what happened in that moment that is constantly normalized by, frankly, an elite class that laughs away the genocide of our people. Yeah,
I just thinking about what you were just saying about just even the laughter, right? And the way this is normalized. It makes me think of a book by Maha Halal, Innocent and So Proven Muslim. And I recently did a review of it, and just really learning and understanding about how empire protects itself across 3 administrations. I mean, we're now, we saw the withdrawal from Afghanistan happening under, beginning of the Biden administration. So it doesn't cover that far, but like just really looking like the 20 years of the war on terror. And so really understanding the rehabilitation that has happened of George Bush, particularly through his friendship, I guess, with Michelle Obama, as this sweet, like old man, like you were saying, he's like, well, I'm just 75, but what does that matter when we're talking about the response and, your admission about, your own basically, actions that involve an entire nation state and another entire group of people. I think there's some ways in which, other folks like Henry Kissinger, there are these older figures that are allowed to exist without any type of impunity. Just as we're wrapping up, Pam, what should people understand about getting involved or being more aware of peace and security? Apologies, y'all. The dog broke in my office and she keeps running back and forth. But I'm not sure if you can hear her or not. But I'm like, oh my God. But just thinking, as we're wrapping up, Pam, more about just broader. What should we really be kind of paying attention to? Because there's so much that pulls our attention. And we might feel like we're being pulled in so many different directions. I have so much to focus on, but this type of stuff, and actually being, if not present in rooms like this, at least being present in conversations. How should people get started? Going about doing that, or what should people be looking at or supporting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first thing that I always say is that all of it is connected, and it has been a myth and a lie that, the working class just doesn't understand national security and foreign policy. We intimately do understand. They just make it extra complicated. And I think, right now, my main project is helping build the party of our dreams. The 2-party system is continually showing that it has exhausted its limits. And frankly, this bipartisanship, right? When I hear about, Michelle Obama and Bush's friendship, part of me is like, okay. And from a position of power, we can no longer continue to negotiate with bad faith actors and not hold them accountable, whether that's the GOP or Israel or Saudi Arabia or the police union that continues to lynch Black people, right, in places like Buffalo. And we must feel empowered as a community and as a movement to know that we are not only on the right side of freedom, but we have the answers for a much better peace and security that breaks down the wall between the international and the domestic, right? I see a future where we're organizing across continents, right, in order to actually face the security threats we do need, right? Which is not scary Black and brown people in power that's going to change the system, but the threats of climate change and and the next pandemic that is going to come, because it is going to come, and housing insecurity, and the fact that we have GOP people out here that don't want to give formula to undocumented people, right, and banning books. And so as scary as these times are and as big as the system and the problems seem, we are on the right path. We are winning momentum. Victories like Summer Lee's prove that we don't have to compromise on our values, right? We do have to organize aggressively. And so, I encourage people to look at the Working Families Party as a vehicle to organize on this battleground. It's a big imperative of ours to ensure that we're bringing this analysis to our work so that we can actually build the kind of power we need. And there are incredible organizations, one that I think is really doing a lot of great work that does a lot of good education for anyone that wants to learn more about these issues is Grassroots Global Justice. They're an incredible organization that really connects these dots. And so it's on all of us to do the work to inform ourselves, inform our families, and our children, because we can do this. I really believe that we can build a different way. It's just about not letting the disinformation take the hold. Are you there?
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Pam, for joining me this morning. I hope you feel better and get some rest over the weekend. And this has been me, Anoa Changa, standing in for Benjamin Dixon on the Benjamin Dixon Morning Show. If you'd like to see more of my work, you can check it out at newsone.com. I write a bunch of stuff for News One. I talk my stuff over there. Shout out to the team. And I might have more content for you a la Ben's channel next week. I don't know. We'll see. Appreciate the team so much for helping me do all the things this week, and appreciate y'all for tuning in, even though I am not the Benjamin Dixon. So I'm going to kick it back over to David and Dwayne and everyone on the back end, and I will see you hopefully again soon. Peace.
Check out Anoa Changa. She's amazing.